Elden Ring's DLC has finally dropped, and the verdict so far has been extremely positive. It's apparently the best reviewed expansion in gaming history, and while the PC version does seem to have some technical ironing out in need, it's already been a huge financial success for FromSoft, both between units moved and new copies sold in preparation of the DLC. I mean, it's been a Steam top seller for weeks at this point, despite its age. And since it's also a popular Souls-like game, there's been the perpetual salt stream of whether 'tis nobler to add difficulty settings to a FromSoft game. And whenever this conversation gets fired up again, it always ends the same way. FromSoft uses the difficulty of their games as a world-building tool, and there is yet to be a From Software Souls-like game that can't be finished by players of basically any skill level, because with the sheer amount of playstyle options, the whole experience can basically be snapped in half if you're willing to learn about the world you're in, instead of having one dominant strategy explained to you like in a lot of other games. Using the difficulty of the game as a world-building tool is a staple of the entire Souls-like genre, and the genre as a whole doesn't work as well when there is a way to take some of that difficulty away. There's no technical reason for Souls-like games to have a difficulty setting, and there's nothing stopping you from simply getting good enough to finish it other than your personal desire to find your own winning playstyle. This isn't a controversial take. I was frankly under the impression that that was the mainstream take, but in case you really need more reasoning, there's no way the Souls-like genre would have gotten as big as it did, and Elden Ring certainly wouldn't have been as popular as it is was if there was a fundamental problem with games that don't have an easy mode. That's just the reality. There is absolutely nothing wrong with not having difficulty settings in a game. You either get good because it's entirely possible to do so, or you don't get good because you didn't actually want to get good. And there's nothing wrong with not wanting to get good, but you can't use your lack of desire to overcome the challenge as a reason to criticize the game's design as a whole, because what you perceive as an objective flaw is not actually an objective flaw. But why am I catching you up on this topic that everyone basically already understands and is familiar with? Well, dear viewer, because the other day, to accompany the release of Shadow of the Erdtree, good old Miyazaki issued a stark defense of the difficulty in Elden Ring, making clear that he not only does not want to change the base difficulty, but he also absolutely stands by the fact that if you aren't going to get good, his games are not for you, which is the most Chad statement I think I've ever heard from a game developer of his status. But here's his full quote. He said in an interview with The Guardian, quote, "If we really wanted the whole world to play the game, we could just crank the difficulty down more and more, but that wasn't the right approach. Had we taken that approach, I don't think the game would have done what it did, because the sense of achievement that players gain from overcoming these hurdles is such a fundamental part of the experience. Turning down difficulty would strip the game of that joy, which, in my eyes, would break the game itself." And boy, gosh, oh golly, did he get yelled at by the internet for this one. Can you believe that people are still mad about Elden Ring being a challenging game? Can you absolutely fathom the fact that there are people out there who genuinely do not want to be challenged by video games and can't wrap their head around the fact that the difficulty is a central part of the experience, because a central theme of FromSoft Souls-likes is the idea of overcoming great challenges, which simply would not hit the same if the game world was not a universal experience, which means no difficulty settings. And like I said before, there are so many playstyles in these games that if you want to break the difficulty in half without actually being very, I guess, traditionally good at video games, you can absolutely do that. All you have to do is pay attention to the world, pay attention to the gameplay. Like, literally every FromSoft game has strategies that completely erase the difficulty. The final boss of Dark Souls 1 can be completely trivialized if you just learn some parry timing. Like, this isn't a new concept that FromSoft games can be overcome by anyone as long as you're willing to figure out what strat works for you. It is not a difficulty problem, it is a personal drive problem. It is a personal desire to get good problem. The game expects you to put time into getting good. God forbid developers expect you to put time into the game that you paid them for. But the point I'm getting at here is that you should strap yourselves in, dear viewer, because IGN tweeted out their coverage of Miyazaki defending the difficulty in Elden Ring, and we're going to read some of the saltiest and most unhinged responses. And we'll start out with a really bad one, instead of me doing my usual build up to the worst tweet routine for these Twitter videos. This is called a video hook, but I'm also saving some really bad ones for the end of the video as well. This is called video retention. What a load of bullshit. There are plenty of great Souls-likes that have difficulty levels and or accessibility, and their games have suffered nothing for it. This artistic intent crap is such a cop-out. This is just laziness and not caring for those who need accessibility options. I think it's funny that you bring up that other Souls-likes with difficulty settings have like, oh, there have been plenty of successful ones. Yeah, there's been plenty of successful ones that don't do difficulty settings. In fact, the most successful ones don't do difficulty settings. So I'm not sure what winning zinger you're trying to set up here. You say artistic intent is a cop-out and that it's lazy to only have one difficulty setting, implying that difficulty settings just don't have laziness to them, which they always do, because a lot of difficulty settings are just increase the amount of health the enemy has, or increase the number of enemies there are. Adding difficulty settings to a Souls-like game is a lot more complicated, because Souls-like games are just inherently a lot more deep in the combat than a lot of other genres are. But to say it's lazy, and that artistic intent is a cop-out, to say that about FromSoft games that so meticulously weave the gameplay into the story. Like, it just, have you tried? Have you tried one? Have you tried one, sir? Have you had any Souls-likes tonight? Most likely not, because overcoming the challenge is part of the experience. And this is also why a lot of people have such wildly different first experiences with Souls-like games. Why do you think there are so many differing opinions over what Souls-like bosses are actually difficult? You know what I mean? Not having difficulty settings is not a lack of artistic intent, and it is certainly not lazy. Basing your entire game around one unified vision and one unified experience, I would argue, is the opposite of lazy, because it means your world has to be all the more engaging to maintain the attention of someone who maybe usually would play on a lower difficulty setting. I'm sure you guys have all heard of experiences of people who are traditionally not great at games, or maybe they're relatively new gamers, and they fell in love with Elden Ring because of that varying difficulty. It makes the game and it makes the progression feel much more unique and much more special to you. I swear, people like this just like, I'm convinced that you just want games to hold your hand all the time. I'm convinced you're not actually capable of understanding the story of a game unless it's like arena, cutscene, walking section, arena, cutscene. Like, God forbid we use something other than that exact structure to tell the story of a game and immerse you in its world. What an asshole Miyazaki is for having more faith in you than the average AAA developer. Harry Bizrat says maybe, but toning it down or giving players an option to adjust if they need to would open the game up to a wider audience. Yes, because Elden Ring is having such a difficult time appealing to a wide audience. How many copies of this game have been sold? Oh, that many? Wow. We must widen the audience because clearly the game is not resonating with people. Fire Breather says, that just shows again that extreme difficulty is simply poor design. And reminder, he's saying this in response to the quote from Miyazaki that lowering the difficulty would break the design. So, to be clear, designing a game a certain way and then fundamentally changing one of the things you balance the entire game around, that being the difficulty, changing that thing arbitrarily results in the game as a whole kind of breaking. Obviously. But according to you, that's the result of bad game design. You think being that meticulous about your game design to the point that difficulty settings are not required because the difficulty of the game is woven into the experience, you think that's actually bad game design. Like, bro, if I change the size of one of the wheels on your car, like I just made the back left wheel 8 inches bigger than the other 3 wheels, your car is gonna drive poorly now. But does that mean the car was poorly designed? No, it just means I arbitrarily changed one of the things it was designed around, that being 4 wheels that are all the same size, and then the overall thing was negatively impacted when I changed it. That is not the result of bad design. That's just the result of existing in the world. Like, what? Hello, I'm interrupting this video to remind you that this channel is sponsored by 4D Gaming. If you would like a really nice mousepad, go to 4dgaming.com and use code Joe for a discount. This channel is also sponsored by Glitch Energy. It's basically G Fuel, but better, so go to Glitch Energy and use code Joe for a discount. Thank you for letting me interrupt your content. I'll let you keep watching it now. Tiger Josh says the game has virtually no story. If the gameplay wasn't the way it is, it'd be just another character action game, and not Game of the Year. So, you think the gameplay is on its own worthy of Game of the Year? I mean, it sure wasn't your intention, but I mean, this reads like a shining endorsement of Elden Ring's gameplay. Bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out for you. Crispy Zero says, I'm just going to shamelessly use a difficulty mod because I see no difference between that and using lol broken cheese strat number 66 that's in the game anyways. If there's no difference between mods and what's in the game anyways, why not just play the game? Like this is what I mean. You literally admit that there's a winning strategy in the difficulty already, and you could just use that strategy, but you're just not going to. Like, I'm all for Elden Ring mods. More stuff is always good. But using mods to lower the difficulty while also acknowledging that you could just not have lowered the difficulty and won the game still, it's just a weird take. You know what I mean? It's just a weird take. It's like saying, yeah, dude, I totally could have finished that bowl of soup, but I stopped eating it most of the way through and I threw it in the trash. But I could have eaten the rest of the soup. I just chose not to. So you should tell everyone that I ate all the soup. You know what I mean? That was a fucking S-tier analogy, and you fucking know it. I don't even want to hear a single thing about that in the comments. That was perfect. My analogy game is fucking unstoppable. Crunchy Nacho says, only because that's all it has. If Souls games were easy, people would definitely not rate them so highly. They exist for the maiden list to give them something to brag about. Today I learned that the reason Souls games are rated so highly, I assume you mean by critics, is because the difficulty makes the critics happy. Sir, have you been paying attention recently? Or perhaps by rating highly, you mean with gamers. The gamers rate these games really highly. And ultimately, the gamer's opinion is way more important than the journo's opinion. We all know that. Except actually, no, surprise, if a lot of gamers like something, according to Crunchy Nacho, it's actually bad, because it's only there for you to brag about them. So, no matter who's rating the game highly, it actually doesn't matter, because it's all just a bunch of maidenless people wanting something to brag about. This is fun. I love arguing like third graders on a playground where we can just hit everyone with the good old-fashioned nuh-uh. If someone's got an argument that you got no real counter to, fucking just hit them with the nuh-uh. Fucking iframes on that are bullshit. Valkylla quote tweets and says, I refuse to add subtitles or additional languages to my film. If you want to enjoy it properly, you need to take the time to become fluent in the original language. Bro, you know that subtitles and additional languages are not exclusive to films. Like, those are in video games as well. This analogy is awful. You're talking to the fucking analogy king. You can't make an analogy with stuff that both subjects already have. Like, you can't equate game difficulty to game subtitles and language options because video games already have those. That's literally not how analogies work. And even if it was, that's still a horrendous comparison because you're arguing that not lowering the difficulty in Elden Ring has the same impact on the experience as a movie without subtitles or additional languages would to someone who doesn't speak the original language the movie was filmed in. That is self-evidently a bad comparison. What is your deal? Nico says, did he said if he pooped today? Really want to know. At Sarenko says he is keeping a lot of folks at bay. Most people I know gave up on the game. And it's not Miyazaki's responsibility for them to play it. Like, oh my god. It's a game. You're not entitled to anything if you don't play it. It's one thing to not want to finish a game because it's bad. It's another thing to not want to finish the game because you don't want to deal with the difficulty. And that's not the game's fault. Unless the difficulty is wildly unfair, and that's why it's keeping you at bay, which everyone who's actually played a FromSoft game will agree Elden Ring is not an example of a game being just bullshit, impossible to overcome video game difficulty. Like, that's just plainly not what Elden Ring is. There's nothing keeping you from getting good at the game other than you. The lowering of the difficulty is built into the game. Experiment with different playstyles, try some different items, or just do the old-fashioned Dark Souls method where everything is really difficult, so you just pick 2 bonfires and you just keep running back and forth between them, grinding XP until you can level up and literally make the game easier. You can't blame From Software for the fact that you bought a game you didn't actually want to play. At name23341, whose username is name2334, says he is wrong and doesn't even play his own game, so he has no clue what he is talking about. Ah, yes. The good old-fashioned my PvP game is unbalanced criticism. Like, have you noticed that? Whenever someone wants to talk shit about a PvP game, the #1 criticism is like, the devs don't even play the game. And it just makes me laugh when that criticism starts floating elsewhere. But I like how this doesn't even make sense, because Miyazaki gives like this very elaborate, very thought out reason as to why he designs games the way that he does. And then your response is like, ugh, he doesn't even play it. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. This extremely specific design that he came up with, he doesn't even get it. Like, oh, okay. I love gatekeeping game creators from their own game. That's the best form of gatekeeping. Solid Snake says that no achievement/trophies is a big no sale for me. People like to track their accomplishments. They really missed the ball on that. And this is in response to the news of the no lowering the difficulty. I gotta tell you, I don't think they care. I just don't think they care. Okay, one more. Oliver Brandt quote tweets the news that Miyazaki thinks lowering the difficulty would break the game, and he says, simply not true. Terrible perspective. It is terrible perspective for the creator of the game to explain why you don't actually need a lower difficulty to beat the game that he designed and understands better than anyone. Expecting you to have the brain power to figure these things out is terrible perspective. Expecting you to be able to overcome challenges, terrible perspective. Not thinking that you need a handicap is terrible perspective. I love this. I love this. I am so excited to play Shadow of the Erdtree. I haven't started yet. I'm recording this on the 21st, so I haven't started yet. I need to finish a couple things before I dive in, you know what I'm saying? Need to get some time for my schedule to steal Elden Ring. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I really shouldn't have done that. Why does anybody watch my content? It doesn't make any sense. Okay. Toodles.